Well, good evening and welcome to Linn Westcott's Wildly Diverse Railroad Photography. My name is Haley Page, the Exhibition and Events Manager at the Center for Railroad Photography and Art. We are excited that so many of you have taken the time to join us tonight. And please note that we are recording tonight's program and it will be made available on our YouTube page in a few weeks' time. You can go there and check out all of our past programs. That link is youtube.com/railphotoart. And we are in store for a really exciting and explorative presentation tonight about the photography of the longtime editor of Model Railroader magazine, Linn Westcott. While some rail fans may not be familiar with this name, it's likely that most model railroaders are. While most model railroaders, what Linn was best known for was obviously model railroading. He did carry a camera with him from time to time and would make quite a few photographs. And our presenter tonight, Kevin Keefe, has spent the last few months digging deep into the archives of Kalmbach media to unearth some of Linn's photographic gems. Before we get into the good stuff tonight, though, I'd like to just run through some quick housekeeping information, as well as briefly introduce the Center for Railroad Photography and Art. Just a reminder, we use Zoom webinar for presentations. This means that audience members do not have access to their personal audio or video during the presentation. But you can change how you'd like to view your presentation in that top right corner of your Zoom screen under the icon View. And at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you'll see a number of other icons. Please use the chat function for any comments you have during the presentation. By selecting everyone, you'll ensure that the entire audience can see your comments. And please use the Q&A icon to submit any questions. Following the main presentation, we will be hosting a Q&A session. So if you have a question at any point during today's presentation, make sure you post that in the Q&A, not the chat, to make sure that we see it. I want to thank all of our regular viewers for tuning in again today, as well as welcome all of our first-time viewers. And I think we have quite a few tonight with the interest of Linn Westcott in model railroading. Well, the Center for Railroad Photography and Art is a membership-supported organization with the mission to preserve and present significant images of railroading. And we accomplish that mission through several programs. We offer a monthly online programming series that covers a wide range of topics in the world of railroading, and we promote these programs regularly through e-blasts and our social media channels. So make sure to keep up to date by checking regularly on our website, following us on social media, and subscribing to our email list. All of our online programs are entirely free, and most are available to stream on our YouTube channel. Again, that link is youtube.com/railphotoart. And this one will be posted in about 2 weeks' time. Our next program will feature interviews with the winners of our 2023 John E. Gruber Creative Photography Awards program. This is a creative photography contest we host every year, and winners receive cash prizes, get published in our journal Railroad Heritage, and have their photographs displayed at the Colorado Road Museum. We will announce the winners of this year's contest, as well as the stars of our next month's program on August 1st. The program itself will take place on August 22nd, and we will open registrations for that next week. Our largest in-person event is our annual Conversations Conference, and that took place this past April in Lake Forest College in Lake Forest, Illinois. We hosted a sold-out crowd and featured presentations from drone perspectives to fine art paintings. We'll be looking to announce the date of our 2024 conference later this fall, so stay tuned. We also oversee a traveling exhibitions program. The center does not maintain a museum space, but instead we partner with institutions to host our exhibitions. Currently, we have 5 shows on display and a few more in the works for the remainder of 2023. And we also have 3 exhibitions available for online viewing, and you can check all of those out on our website. Railroad Heritage is our ad-free quarterly journal, and it's a benefit of membership. Back copies of the magazine are available on our website. And our next print publication will be Rio Grande Steam Finale, which will be released in October, and pre-orders for that will be available very soon. And we have our Railroad Heritage Visual Archive. It's a representative collection encompassing the many styles and subjects of railroad photography and art from the early 19th century to the present. We have over 900,000 items committed to our collection and a fantastic team working to process and make our visual imagery accessible. In fact, we just a few weeks ago, we launched our long-awaited collections management system, Odyssey. The site is live now. That's at railphoto.historyit.com. Go and check it out. There is so much to explore. You can find links to that on our website, right on our homepage. And we will also be hosting a tutorial and a Q&A for the Odyssey site on Tuesday, August 15th. Registrations for that are available now on our website. All of the work we do at the center is made possible by members and donations. Support from our community provides over 70% of our funding. Thank you for being our engine. And thank you to our members who commit to donating on an annual basis. You drive so much of what we do. If you're not a member but are interested in joining, get in touch with us. Membership includes access to our quarterly members-only presentations, discounts to our annual conference, 4 issues of our journal, Railroad Heritage. You can learn more and join us by visiting our website, and that link is railphoto-art.org. All right, now without any further ado, I'd like to present introduce our presenter this evening, Kevin Keefe. Kevin is a member of the Center's Board of Directors and an outstanding asset and advocate for our organization. Presently, he is a columnist and blogger for Classic Trains magazine. Kevin studied journalism at Michigan State University. He then worked in daily newspapers and spent 29 years in Kalmbach Publishing Company, where he was a member of the train staff for 13 years, 18 of which he was editor-in-chief. He later served as the magazine's publisher, and he retired from Kalmbach in 2016 as their vice president editorial. His book, 1225, The Life and Times of a Steam Locomotive, won the Notable Book Award from the Library of Michigan in 2016, and the center has since had the pleasure of working with him on several publications. Wallace W. Abbey, A Life in Railroad Photography, which we published in 2018, Railroad Photography of J. Parker Lamb, which was published in 2019, and most recently our 2021 publication, The Railroad and the Art of Place, an Anthology. And all of those are available for sale on our website. Last year, he also co-edited a book on Wallace Abbey's photography of the introduction of the FT diesel electric locomotives. That's called The Diesel That Did It, and it's available for sale in Indiana University Press. And you can watch a different presentation that Kevin did for us about the book on our YouTube channel. But now to discuss the great Linn Westcott's photography, I'd like to turn the mic over to Kevin Keefe.
Thank you, Haley. Hi, everyone. Great to be here tonight. I'm excited about this. A few months ago, when Haley and Scott Lotus asked me if I'd be interested in doing a program of photography by Linn Westcott, it took me just about a nanosecond or two to say yes. There were 2 big reasons. The first reason, of course, was Linn was a really good photographer, and the more we can do to share his work with others, the better. But the second reason was more personal. I knew Linn for a couple of years when I first worked at Kalmbach in 1974. And I am increasingly aware that I'm one of the few people left who really remember what it was like to walk those same halls with David P. Morgan and Dave Ingalls and Gordon Odegaard and my dear friend Gil Reed and a whole bunch of other people. So I really wanted to kind of do right by Linn. And one of those people, one of those really great talents at Kalmbach was Linn, of course. He was then in his last years as the editor of Model Railroader. I didn't see Linn all that often. As I recall, he was functioning more then as like an editor emeritus, with the day-to-day function of the magazine being run by the managing editor, Russ Larson, who later became my boss. But every encounter I had with Linn was really rewarding. A polymath among polymaths, Linn had command of uncountable subjects in railroading, from company histories to steam locomotive technology, to building benchwork for your layout, to wiring your model railroader. And as if to prove that, his how-to model railroad books have sold in the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, over the last 75 years. And to an inquisitive 24-year-old, he was endlessly patient and cheerful, and I will always be grateful for that. So yeah, I'm very happy to join all of you tonight and explore another one of Linn's talents, and that is of photography. Well, my opening slide is worth commenting on as a small caption at the bottom, but you can see Linn Westcott on Horseshoe Curve leading out the Dutch door of a Pennsylvania Railroad train in 1937. This is 2 years into his employment at Kalmbach. Before we get into the photography and some of the other stuff, I think we should do a little bit more of an introduction of Linn. For some of you who may not know that much about him, he was born in 1913 in Los Angeles. Ended up attending college at Carleton College in Minnesota, which I think that must have been a key reason why he ended up at Kalmbach, just being in the upper Midwest. How he got together with Al Kalmbach, I don't know, but certainly being in the upper Midwest made a big difference. He was one of Kalmbach's first employees. He started working for the company in 1935. He worked as an early all-purpose editor on the train staff. He was a terribly skilled map maker and page designer, not just an editor, not just a writer. And then he went on to serve as editor of Model Railroader from 1961 to 1977, during a really important era in the history of Model Railroader, when the magazine really certainly asserted itself as the leader of the hobby and the industry. He was also one of the hobby's great innovators in all kinds of areas of model railroading. And I'll show you a couple of his books here in a moment. Sad to say, he died rather young at age 67 in September 1980 in Milwaukee. It would be worth pointing out that the very first cover photo for Trains magazine was taken by Linn Westcott, ultimately the editor of Model Railroader. This is Linn's photo of the water tank at Casco Junction in northeast Wisconsin, which was the junction of the Anapian Western Short Line and the Green Bay and Western. And I think it's worth reading here what Morgan had to say about this photograph, because it tells you a little bit about Linn's approach to photography. What a bio cannot tell you is how part of this is shielded from me. Let me see, there is how Linn led Trains magazine down paths never trod by a railroad magazine before. For instance, the first cover of Trains. One would expect the obvious, a train, but the obvious and Linn were incompatible. Instead, volume 1, number 1's cover was a photo of a wooden water tank shot by Linn at an angle 15 degrees off center. Alas, we never asked Linn why a tank made the cover instead of a train or a locomotive, but we're sure his answer would have been that in the steam season, water was as key an element as rolling stock and deserved the honor. David P. Morgan. I thought that was a great quote. I'm pushing down here, Haley, and nothing's happening.
You try clicking with your mouse instead.
I don't have a mouse. Oh, you mean, well, I have the pad here.
Yeah, there are arrow indicators on the bottom left. There you go.
Okay, oh, I'll use those then. All right, I'm not used to using those. So anyway, here's some examples of Linn's work. Of course, Model Railroader on the left, a typical issue from, I think, I can't quite read it, 1965, when MR was leading the market and he was the editor, very innovative editor. A couple of books that he did that would really have sold in the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, 101 track plans for model railroaders and HO Railroad That Grows. And then finally, another book, one of many, is the Model Railroader Steam Locomotive Psych, which, even though it carries the Model Railroader logo, it's one of the great books on steam technology. Here's a photo of Linn, the artist, at his desk at 1027 North 7th Street early in his career. Like I mentioned earlier, he was as much an art director as he was an editor in those first few years when everyone at Kalmbach was expected to be a jack of all trades. Much later, and this is more like the way Linn looked when I knew him, here we see him fine-tuning the running gear mechanism of an HO scale steam engine, or demonstrating his tried and true method of building scenery. He was always a dapper guy. After he died in 1980, at some point thereafter, Linn's widow Harriet let the folks at Kalmbach know that, I don't know if they knew this or not, but Linn had quite a cache of Kodachrome slides that he'd been shooting in the late 40s and early 50s. I think that probably came as a surprise to the Kalmbach folks. And here's just an example of the pile of stuff that I've been working my way through in the last couple of weeks. That led the company to start making use of Linn's photography whenever it could. And two early examples are this cover story that Morgan did in 1985, The Color World of Linn Westcott, which was 7 or 8 pages of nothing but Linn's photographs. And then another big selling book, Kalmbach's Diesel Locomotives of the First 50 Years, showing a great shot by Linn of a Pennsylvania Railroad's Baldwin Centipede and a Illinois Central E7 at St. Louis Union Station. Linn loved one-to-one scale, and so now I'm going to start working our way through some of his photographs of action photographs of trains. Here's a shot that's been seen quite a bit. The engineer of a Santa Fe E6 has the highball and departs west from Kansas City Union Station. I wish I knew which train it was. I can't say. One thing I can say about Linn was he wrote almost nothing on the slide mounts. So this whole project has been quite a detective job over the last couple of weeks. But I love the way he caught a little bit of blur panning the E6 as it left the station. Here's a great shot at High Bridge, Valley City, North Dakota, a Northern Pacific freight train crossing 162 feet above the Cheyenne River. NP opened the bridge in 1908. It's 3,860 feet long. And I might note, some of you probably know this, but I was surprised to see that the Cheyenne River spells Cheyenne with an S. Here's a shot where I really can't tell you much about it at all. This is where Linn comes up to bite you with his lack of information on the slide mounts. Obviously, these are Northern Pacific F units, and they're passing now redundant water tanks somewhere on the main street of the Northwest, as it says on the flanks of the diesels. I love this shot, which also ran in classic trains, rotating paint schemes. A Rock Island F7A and a B lead an Alco FA nearing Houston, Texas. And I was informed by my colleague Rob McGonigal that the lead engine is in the freight livery, the older freight livery, the middle B unit is in passenger colors, and the FA is in a later simplified freight paint scheme. Here's a shot, a great shot on the Southern Pacific. This is a quartet of F3s approaching Tehachapi, California with a steam helper on the rear. And I'm sure many of our audience tonight have been to Tehachapi to shoot, whether it's BNSF or Union Pacific, and probably know this location. But what a great shot. And you can see the plume from the steam helper in the back. And Linn waited long enough to catch the end of the train with an AC cab forward helper coming into view at the end of the train. Tehachapi is a wonderland. It was then, and it still is now. And then later, I think that same day, because the engine numbers line up, this appears to be, I think this is Tehachapi. I don't know for sure because Linn didn't say so. And a couple of people I checked with weren't entirely sure either, but I'm guessing this is Tehachapi, and somehow the steam helper is being cut off, and maybe the diesels are being positioned to take the train eastward into Mojave. Here's a shot of a nickel plate 284 on the turntable at Dillonvale, Ohio. This was the Pine Valley Engine Terminal. And even though the engine's lettered nickel plate, it really started out life as a Wheeling and Lake Erie 284. Of course, the nickel plate acquired the Wheeling and Lake Erie via lease. I think sometime in the late 1930s, early 50s, 40s, I'm not sure. But anyway, this is a great shot of one of the Wheeling 284s wearing nickel plate colors and a nickel plate number. And my thanks to my buddy John Corns for that information. Here's a heroic shot on the New York Central. Here, Linn caught the New York Central's train 51, the Empire State Express, rolling through Rochester in 1953. This was still the glory days of the New York Central. That is to say, Al Perlman and Robert R. Young were still a year away. So this train still looks magnificent. The E8s are clean, the consist is complete, and it just looks like the New York Central is supposed to look. And here's the same train, the going away shot at Rochester, with one of New York Central's great Bud-built teardrop OBS cars on the rear end. Here's a shot I don't know much about. I'm sure right now my buddy Ron Flannery's looking at it, and he knows probably exactly where this is, but I don't. It's a Louisville and Nashville 282 leading a freight. I do know it's heading toward Nashville because Linn did offer at least that much information. Is this in Kentucky? Is this in Tennessee? I don't know, but it's a nice shot of that classic L&N power with that big headlight and that big number on the glass. Here's a shot that I wish I knew more about. This is the Kansas City Zephyr on the Burlington, working on Kansas City terminal trackage behind what I believe is an E5 diesel. It might be an E6, but I think it's an E5. I can't see the number. But I love the way that Linn lined up both the train and the truck on the street kind of facing the camera with the same perspective. And I think it's just a really nice composition. Here, Linn is in Evansville or near Evansville, Minnesota, which is roughly halfway between Twin Cities and Fargo, North Dakota. He's caught two Great Northern freights meeting near Evansville, and you can see one of the crew members of one of the trains is on the ground, probably talking to the fireman on the oncoming train. I don't think Linn was riding the train. I believe he was probably riding with a friend along the highway on the left. Here's a shot that we've been using off and on for several years, and I'm grateful to Ron Flannery for help with this. We see Nashville, Chattanooga, and St. Louis F7s spanking clean, really, at the railroad's West Nashville shops. Ron informs me that the NC and St. L F7B units were the ones with the steam generator for passenger trains, not the A units. And after the NC and St. L and the L&N merged in 1957, the L&N would splice its own FP7s with these B units. The B units were also used between two E units at times, especially on the 20 to 22 car Hummingbird south of Nashville. So a wonderful shot of the old NC&L paint scheme, the late great NC&L paint scheme. Here's another shot of a different F unit at the same location. And Linn turned to his right slightly and got this great shot in their freight paint scheme of an SW1 along with a Jeep and that same shop building in the background. Here we have Linn visiting in Saluda, North Carolina, at the top of fabled Saluda Grade. We see Southern F units lugging a passenger train up to the top of the hill right into town. This was the steepest stretch of standard gauge mainline in the US, averaging 4.24% for 2.6 miles, or gaining 600 feet in less than 3 miles, which is pretty amazing. Saluda was taken out of service by Norfolk Southern in 2001, but I believe the tracks are still in place. I did look up on Google Street View, and I believe that wonderful Esso gas station in the left side in the background is now a taco stand. Here's another shot at the bottom of Saluda Hill, showing F units descending with a freight train with brake shoes smoking from the descent. Linn did a lot of shooting along US 30 or out that way in Nebraska. And here we see a shot of a 210-2 in full flight hauling reefers across Nebraska. And I presuming the same day, he got this great shot of two of UP's giant 412-2s, 9511 and 9033 meeting along US 30. The UP had 88 of these monsters. They were dubbed the Union Pacific type. Nobody else had an engine like this. And Alco delivered all of them between 1926 and 1930. They developed an incredible 100,000 pounds of tractive force, which is amazing for a non-articulated locomotive. And only one of these survives. The number 9000, thankfully, does survive at the Rail Giants Museum in Pomona, California. I love this shot. Linn and a friend are chasing the coast daylight, which is heading north towards San Francisco, passing the photographers near as I can tell, Santa Margarita, California, on the SP's coastline. I love the fact that these guys have put a blanket over the windshield to keep it, presumably to keep it from getting too hot, or maybe just to give the photographer traction up on the roof. You'll note the bumper sticker there for a model train show in Emeryville, California, which might have been, almost certainly was the reason Linn was out there. The other thing I wondered about, and it's just a hunch, but that looks a bit like Bill Aiken to me on the car. Bill Aiken was a wonderful photographer in his own right till he gave up the hobby in the mid-50s. He was for many years the art director at Kalmbach and later became a vice president in charge of Kalmbach Press. And then when I went to work in 1974 there, he was my boss. So I really like that photograph a lot. And of course, the daylight looks pretty darn good too, doesn't it? Here we see a scene at Chatsworth, California, a Southern Pacific freight train behind a quartet of F units. The train has just cleared a short tunnel at Chatsworth. This is just about where a Metrolink commuter train and a Union Pacific local freight collided in 2008 in a terrible accident that was a significant factor in the drive toward today's positive train control. But the rock cut make it unmistakably Chatsworth. And now we have a trio of shots that I used in my blog on classic trains a few months ago, and I felt like it should be repeated. Linn appeared to have a love affair with the Monon. He did a lot of photography on the Monon for an issue in trains in around 1950. And here he is in December 1950 in Monticello, Indiana, on the Monon's line to Indianapolis. And arriving at Monticello is Monon Train 11, the morning train from Chicago to Indy. And Linn has done a marvelous job of collecting the whole railroad scene into this photograph, from the automobile, which I tried real hard to identify on the right, to the train order signal, the baggage carts collected on the platform, and of course the short but impressive little oncoming train. And here was the scene on the station platform as the station agent and baggage hands went about their business on Train 11 on that cold morning. And before the train left, Linn managed to get a nice shot before it headed out of town behind those red and gray F3s. Plenty of power for Train 11's 5 cars. Here's a shot, the only one I have on the Pacific Great Eastern, which is a railroad I don't know much about, but I'm grateful to my buddy Greg McDonald for some help with this. Here we see GE 70 tonners double heading, hauling a great Pacific Great Eastern passenger train. We think along Seton Lake, south of Lillooet, British Columbia. And Pacific Great Eastern began construction in British Columbia in 1912 and expanded in fits and starts over the next couple of decades, eventually becoming a 1,400-mile network. In 1972, it was renamed British Columbia Railway, or BCR. And since 2003, BCR has been leased fully to Canadian National, as I understand it. Beautiful shot along a beautiful lake in the Canadian Rockies. Here we're in Michigan. This is actually the town of, I don't know how to pronounce this. I should, because I'm a Michigander. Capac, C-A-P-A-C. Capac, a small town on the Flint subdivision, about halfway between Flint and Port Huron on the Canadian border, on what is today Canadian National's main line to Chicago. And here Linn caught a Grand Trunk Western freight led by one of their fabulous 484s, which are pretty much carbon copies of Canadian National 484s. And he, before the train headed out for this shot, he paused long enough to get this nice portrait of the front end. Alco built these 484s in the early 1940s. And it's great to know that 2 sisters of this engine, 6323 and 6325, survive. The first one at the Illinois Railway Museum in Union, Illinois, and the 6325 at the Age of Steam Roundhouse in Sugar Creek, Ohio. Here we're in Fort Fergus Falls, Minnesota. Not much to say about this shot other than it's a lovely photograph of a caboose hop. There's lots to see here. Certainly the crew, perfectly attired, out on the back platform, enjoying the breeze. I love the fact that Rocky the Goat the logo is on the back platform along with being alongside the side of the caboose. And I'm puzzled as to the presence of an extra water tank on the 282, but that's cool too. And of course, this immaculate wooden platform and the train order signal serve to make this a complete railroad scene. We're still on the Great Northern, and this time we're at a place called Fort Wright. Again, Linn left me no information, but it looked like Washington, so I did some digging. And sure enough, there was a place on the west side of Spokane called Fort George Wright, a military location established in the 1890s and decommissioned in 1957. Now, I don't know why there's a quarry there at Fort Wright, but I think nearby is the site of the old fort. And I can't tell what train that is. Some Great Northern fans out there probably know. It's obviously a day train coming into Spokane behind a trio of F units in that fabulous orange and green Great Northern paint scheme. Linn had a deep attraction to traction, if you will. And so the next bunch of pictures, we have a lot of stuff here that's all about trains under wire, or maybe in a couple of cases, third rail. Not a surprise that Linn loved traction because he lived in Milwaukee in the 1930s and 40s when there was still a heck of a lot to see here. For instance, this shot, a Milwaukee Electric interurban approaching West Junction around 1937. I'll show you a couple other shots at West Junction, but to make it simple, West Junction was a junction on the far west side of Milwaukee where the line heading off in the distance sort of straight would head down toward Hales Corners and Burlington, Wisconsin, and the line off to the right would take a 90-degree turn and head west to Waukesha, the eventual home of Kalmbach Media. This picture was taken in 1937 when the TM was still going fairly strong. Here's an earlier shot at West Junction of an earlier car, and I love the destination sign on the front displaying Public Service Building, which today is a fabulous building, wonderfully restored, and still very much the headquarters of We Energies, the giant Wisconsin utility. Here's another shot related to the TM, the Milwaukee Electric. Here are Milwaukee streetcars at the intersection of Plankinton and Wisconsin Avenues, taken in approximately 1938. I think I've tried to orient myself here, but I believe Linn is shooting out the window in the Plankinton building down on the intersection. And this is right in the heart of Milwaukee. Off to the right out of sight is the Gimbel's department store. And up at the upper right, just partly in shadow, is the building that houses today's Riverside Theater. Here's a shot taken during the dying days of the rapid transit line on the Milwaukee Electric. Here's a speed rail car heading west on the rapid transit line beneath the high tension towers just west of 35th Street in Milwaukee. And just off to the left in that open area is approximately where in about 3 years, Milwaukee County would build County Stadium, the eventual home of the Milwaukee Braves baseball team. I love this picture. Now Linn is focusing his camera on the North Shore, the Chicago North Shore in Milwaukee. And here we have a Chicago-bound train making the transition from 6th to 5th Streets on Milwaukee's near south side with a pair of North Shore Silverliner cars. And in the distance is, you can't see it very well, but is a wonderful church, Catholic church, St. Patrick's, a Gothic revival church built in 1893. And sometimes it's really easy to peg where these North Shore pictures were taken just because there's always a church somewhere in the background. And it's either Lutheran or Catholic, for what that's worth. My thanks to my friend Chuck Weinstock for helping with this picture that Linn left no information for. Obviously, these are Pittsburgh PCC cars, and now I've figured it out with Chuck's help that this is cars approaching the trolley tunnel near the Pittsburgh and Lake Erie Passenger Depot on the opposite side of the Monongahela River from downtown Pittsburgh. And in the distance, you can see the Smithfield Street Bridge, which still stands, or at least a version of the Smithfield Street Bridge still stands. Here we are with a Pacific Electric shot. Who knows why Linn was out in Southern California? Of course, he was born there and raised there. Here he is in Santa Ana, looking down on 4th Street as one of the PE's big blimp cars works its way through city traffic. And I think one of those people on the corner is Raymond Chandler, but I can't be sure. Now we move much farther north in California, up toward Sacramento. And here we see on the Sacramento Northern, an approaching freight train behind one of their motors. Sacramento Northern was a 183-mile system consisting mostly of 2 sections, one between Oakland and Sacramento, which this is on, and the other a line from Sacramento north to Chico. Various portions of the railroad were constructed between 1905 and 1913. Interurban passenger service ended in 1941, but freight service continued over the portions of the railroad into the 1960s. And I'll tell you more about the motor in this next shot. This is motor number 661, one of two Class D 1,000 horsepower steeple cabs delivered to Sacramento Northern in 1927 and retired from service in 54. And near as I can tell, these photographs were taken in Shepherd Canyon, which was immediately east of Oakland. And I haven't been there, but I'm guessing right now it's covered with subdivisions. I love this photo of one of my favorite cities in the world. Here we are in New Orleans, Louisiana. An elegant white gloved pedestrian is oblivious to an approaching streetcar on the St. Charles Avenue line. The date, I'm guessing, is roughly 1962, judging from the Thunderbird parked there near her. I had no idea, well, I had some idea where this was, and this is where I used Google Street View and just went up and down the St. Charles Avenue trolley line until I spotted those same buildings that are still standing today. So that was my key to nailing this location. But what a wonderful shot of a summer day, or presumably a summer day in New Orleans, one of the world's great cities. And of course, as I think everybody tonight probably knows, the streetcar still runs. Now we're to a place that was more obscure for me. And I want to thank Stephen Hawkins of the Greenville and Western and a couple other railroads for his help with this. This is a late model 4-truck Piedmont and Northern motor built in 1941, weighed 118 tons, massive motor at an undisclosed location. Stephen did help me with a couple other locations, but the Piedmont Northern was a 128-mile system serving Western North Carolina and upstate South Carolina. It mainly hauled coal and coke, but also cotton, paper, and some other commodities. And a major customer was, not surprisingly, Duke Power. Remnants of the PNN still exist, including a portion operated today by the Greenville and Western, which is a subsidiary of Stephen's company, Western Carolina Railway Service Corporation. Now here's another shot, which I love, a going away shot. I love the fact that Linn thought to shoot the going away picture, especially in the era of cabooses. That was probably an easier decision to make, but still, what a wonderful picture of a PNN freight winding its way through Gastonia, now a western suburb of Charlotte. I almost said Charlotte, Rob. Footnote, the late Trains editor Jim Wren started his journalism career at the Gastonia Gazette. And here's where the Piedmont Northern made a lot of its money. Here's one of their motors and a rotary dumper at Duke Power's Riverbend Power Plant, a gigantic coal-fired power plant in Mount Holly, North Carolina. Duke retired the Riverbend Power Plant in 2013, and as of 2019 was still tearing portions of it down. Just a grab shot of Linn's. I had to do a little bit of research on this. In fact, because he said nothing, but clearly it's Washington, D.C. And this was, I think they only had one car called this. This was the Silver Sightseer, a PCC car that had been dialed up for tourist service. And it was the only air-conditioned car in the fleet. And note, of course, if you're familiar with Washington traction, you already know this, the trolley pulls down, because in these parts of the city, the system used electric power via a cable buried in the street. Nice paint scheme, though, even on the bus. Now, of course, you know, Linn's greatest reputation, or his biggest reputation, is that of a modeler. And any good modeler is fascinated by railroad physical plant. And so it's no wonder that a lot of the pictures that Linn left us are pictures of track and bridges and switches and things like that, not trains. Here's a great shot back at West Junction on the Milwaukee Electric. No train in sight, but I'm sure Linn liked it that way. We're looking south to where the TM crossed the Chicago Northwestern Main Line to Butler in about 1938. And from this photograph, you can see what a neat operation the TM was, at least up till nearly the end. It was a first-class company with a really substantial physical plant. Here's another shot that Linn obviously took. He didn't want a train in it. Here we see the rapid transit through Truss Bridge crossing the Milwaukee Road and the Menominee River, looking west near the eventual site of County Stadium. Many of those rapid transit high tension towers in the far distance are still there, but everything in the foreground, of course, is gone. This is a major interchange here for I-94 and another city expressway. And over to the left in the 50s and 60s and 70s was County Stadium. And now over to the left is American Family Field, home of the Milwaukee Brewers, who are playing the Cincinnati Reds tonight. And we hope it's going well. My thanks to my good friend Otto Dobnik for helping me with this photo, because here's another one where Linn didn't say anything. All I had to go on was the Wabash name on the freight house and the Papard Seed Company. And the Papard Seed Company apparently had operations in various locations in Missouri, because at first that name had me searching for this location in St. Louis. But Otto he corrected me. This is an S-curve bridge for one of the Kansas City Public Service streetcar routes through downtown Kansas City. This is in what's called the Kansas City Bottoms. This route was on what was called the 8th Street Elevated. The route dropped down from the west side of downtown into a double-track tunnel, then popped out of the side of the bluff onto the elevated you see here. Both conventional and PCC streetcars use this elevated. Interestingly, the one station on the KC elevated portion is the one you see in this view, and it was called St. Louis Avenue Station. Here's another complex piece of track that I'm going to refer to some notes here that my good buddy John B. Corns helped me with. We're in Massillon, Ohio, where the lines of the Pennsylvania, the Nickel Plate, depending on what time in history you're talking about, and Baltimore, Ohio converged. And you'll notice, let me find my notes here. You can see a Pennsylvania train and its caboose coming off, a westbound train coming off the bridge over the Tuscarawas River. And where's my note, John? Right next to it and going off on that smaller deck bridge is the Nickel Plate line leading across the river, located during World War II when they rerouted the river. The line heading straight away from us is the Wheeling and Lake Erie former main line from Massillon to Navarre and Orrville, Ohio. And over on your right is Baltimore and Ohio's Cleveland, Lorain, and Wheeling main line. All of this taking place probably in about 1950. So thanks, John B., for that information. Here's an interesting little grab shot that I never would have expected. A Atlantic Coastline rail testing vehicle. I never saw one that looked like that, working its way through the streets of Tampa, Florida. And this might be over a section that still exists leading to Tampa Union Station. I don't know that for sure, but if somebody out there in the chat can help me, maybe that's still one of the tracks that leads through the Eber City District. Here is a classic Linn Westcott shot, all physical plant, virtually no trains. And at first I was quite thrown by this because I had no idea where this was. But thanks to Ron Flannery for straightening me out. This is a view from the pinnacle, as they call it, at Cumberland Gap, Tennessee in July 51. The Louisville and Nashville depots at the bottom of the photo, with L&N's Cumberland Valley Division approaching from the left. Southern Railway's line to Knoxville heads away toward the top. And both lines combine to use the tunnel near the bottom right to go under Cumberland Mountain. And I might have thought this was a drone photograph, but for the fact that there were no drones then, and but for the fact that there's clearly a rock ledge there in the foreground that Linn appears to be standing on. And of course, physical plant also includes signals. And Linn got this lovely Kodachrome of semaphores at sunset at Marion, Ohio. I can't tell what direction he's facing. It might be in the morning, it's probably in the evening. Famous junction of the Big Four, Chesapeake and Ohio, and the Erie. Now some shots around Linn's adopted hometown. That would be in Milwaukee, of course. I'm very envious of Linn to have lived in Milwaukee in the 40s and 50s, when he could leave 1027 North 7th Street in the afternoon after work and spend as many hours as he wanted wandering around downtown to the 3 stations that still existed in downtown Milwaukee. And one of them, of course, was the Milwaukee Road Station. Now here's a shoddy shot in the suburb. We see a Milwaukee 484 approaching Pilgrim Road in suburban Brookfield with an eastbound train in 1946. And this scene doesn't look all that different today, although there's a lot of housing in this landscape now. Here we are downtown in Milwaukee, where Milwaukee Road 462 is ready to leave east from the downtown Milwaukee Depot, which is now the site of a huge We Energies annex building that's next to the old public service building that was their original headquarters, and we'll see that in a second. Milwaukee Road 462s were not my favorite aesthetically, but I'm sure some of you differ. Here we see a 1938 view from the corner of 6th and Clybourne Streets, which looks nothing like this now. You see the afternoon Hiawatha with an F7464 taking on water at the west end of the station. And I love this shot because dozens of photographers shot these trains down there at the bottom of the hill. But I believe that Linn wanted to see the street trackage of what I believe is a North Shoreline spur, because up over to the left, over his left shoulder, was the North Shore station for stub end station for Milwaukee. But in the distance, you see one of the Milwaukee's F7 streamlined Hudsons taking out water. You can see the wonderful old Gothic clock tower of the Milwaukee Road station. And a couple of the buildings in the far distance still stand, but most of what you see there is gone. Here we see the beaver tail observation car of the rear of the Chicago Twin Cities afternoon Hiawatha as it arrives in Milwaukee in 1938. And the building on the right, that is the public service building, which was the headquarters of the Milwaukee Electric Railway and Light Company for so many years. And on its first floor had a 5 or 6 track in the building train station for all its interurban cars. The building is not only intact, but is beautifully restored, although those 2 fabulous smokestacks are gone. And in the distance, if you stayed in Milwaukee in a hotel before, it quite likely was the Milwaukee Hilton, which is in the background, back when it was the Hotel Schrader. Great old Milwaukee German name. Here we're just west of Milwaukee in the suburb of Wauwatosa, and an eastbound Milwaukee train is paused at the old frame station there, which was torn down in the early 50s to make way for a very ugly station that itself didn't last for long. But just to give you some perspective here, of course, the main line in the foreground is still the main line of Canadian Pacific with CPKC. But in the background, you'll see that building behind the train order signal. And that building for a couple of years or a year or two was the home of Kalmbach Publishing Company. Al Kalmbach rented offices on the 2nd or 3rd floor of that building. Building is still there. It's got a couple of great restaurants in it, and the buildings over on the right are still there too. But sad to say, where the station is now a parking lot for said restaurants. Now we're going to switch to the Chicago and Northwestern. Here's a post-war photo on the Milwaukee lakefront, where we see a CNNW E7 had just pulled off the 7:30 a.m. train from Chicago. And in the distance, you can see the Romanesque tower of Northwestern's much lamented lakefront station. And just as Penn Station was in New York, the destruction in 1966 of the Northwestern's lakefront station was one of the pivotal moments in the formation of a true architectural preservation movement in Milwaukee. The buildings to the right, the one on the left is gone. I forgot what that is, but the white building on the right, the terracotta building, is the Cudahy Apartments, which is still a very fashionable address in Milwaukee. Here we're inside the train shed of that station. Train and station crews are scurrying around before the departure of a westbound train from the lakefront station. And views that for me anyway, views of the inside of this train shed are rare. Now Linn has worked his way over to just a few hundred yards south of that station to the Northwestern's lakefront engine terminal, where he got a really nice portrait of a Tossler adding sand to a 280. Northwestern had 300 280s built for the railroad by Alco between 1913 and 1923. And if you've ever been to Summerfest, the giant music festival, and you use the Summerfest parking lot, you could have easily been parking exactly where the sanding tower once stood. This is one of my favorite shots in the whole program. Here, Linn is standing on the Milwaukee Electric Railway Bridge near 92nd Street. Actually, it's over the Northwestern. And here we see one of Northwestern's gigantic H8 484s leading westbound freight through West Dallas at a railroad location called Belton. And in the distance is the 92nd Street City Bridge. Over on the right is the Northwestern's branch line to Waukesha. And over on the left is the early westward main line of the Milwaukee Electric Railway and Light Company, which was later replaced in the 1930s by the Rapid Transit line, but they kept the line still in place. And if you want to look, I can't remember what issue it was, but if you want to read about these magnificent H8 engines, go read Wally Abbey's story way back in trains in the 1970s. Now, Linn got this great shot of the freight approaching from the east, and then he turned around and got an equally great shot of the same train heading west and making the quick turn northward toward Butler on the main line, and in the process crossing the Milwaukee Electric line to Waukesha. So a great pair of before and after pictures. And finally tonight, some examples of what Linn could do with people pictures. He was pretty good at it in color. I wasn't able to correct the exposure here very good, but here's a really wonderful shot of passengers surrounding the newsstand in Chicago Union Station's late great concourse in 1951. And you might just imagine what it would be like to be standing there shopping for a magazine before you caught a Rock Island train, or not a Rock Island train, a Burlington train, a GM&O train, or a Milwaukee Road train, or certainly the Pennsylvania Railroad. And I love this vision of what Chicago used to be like. Here's a shot of the crew of that earlier caboose hop we saw. This is the crew of a Great Northern 282 examining train orders at Fergus Falls as the dynamo hums away up above them near the cab roof. This might be my favorite photograph in the entire program. I think this is a wonderful shot of a railroader doing his job. It's a hostler attending to a diminutive Illinois Central 040T, and but it's at a location I don't know what it is. Linn didn't tell me. It's probably Chicago. It's probably down at Hazel Crest or someplace like that. But it could be Memphis. It could be New Orleans. But what a wonderful shot of a guy who seems to take his work quite seriously. And two crew members on a Rock Island train conferring at a location unknown. That's all I can tell you. It's an E7, and it shows off that wonderful Rock Island passenger paint scheme with the embossed rocket lettering on the side. Probably Joliet, but who knows? Might be LaSalle Street. And finally, our last photograph is a Missouri Pacific yard clerk, wonderful shot, in Kansas City practicing his trade underneath a lamp in a nice, well-lighted window. So with that, we're finishing the photographs of Linn Westcott, but I just wanted to add one more, which I think is very telling. We lost Linn very young at age 67. I do know that Linn, in the years that I knew him, seemed to come and go at his leisure, which was a great thing. He deserved it. And I think one of the practical jokers on the MR staff was up to something when they took this photograph. And then, of course, another laudatory note from David P. Morgan. Linn, you were a teacher without a blackboard. And that he was. And finally, I'd like to make a point of thanking everybody. I hope I catch everybody who helped me with this thing. Abigail and Aaron and Haley at the center staff in Madison. Brian, my boss at Classic Trains these days. Rob McGonigal, editor emeritus. I don't know if that's his official title, but it should be at Classic Trains. Thanks to Tom, the Kalmbach media librarian, for helping me get some of the stuff I needed. My buddy Dave Lustig in LA helped me with the SP stuff. Ron, thank you all the time for stuff about your neck of the woods. Stephen Hawkins, you were great with the Piedmont and Northern stuff. I appreciate that, and I hope your railroads are doing well. Otto Dobnik, traction guru. He's an incredible font of knowledge about just about anything to do with railroads. One of my best friends, John B. Corns, the Wizard of Massillon. Chuck Weinstock, thanks for your help with Pittsburgh. And Chuck Galetsky, also for your help with the location of the Grand Trunk 484 photograph. And with that, folks, I'm finished, and I hope you enjoyed the program. And Haley, I'm imagining you want to switch to...
Yeah, sure. I can stop your.
You can do that yourself? Okay, great.
Well, that was fantastic, Kevin. Thank you so much. I mean, obviously,
Sure.
thank you to everyone who helped you out, but thank you most to you for taking the time to put this together and all the work you did, and not only looking through Kalmbach's archives to pull these pictures together and find all those locations, but putting together this wonderful commentary and in retrospective of Linn's career, much more than I think people could ever appreciate. So.
Well, you and everyone else at the center are welcome, Haley, and certainly the entire audience. This was a lot of fun to do. I'm glad I didn't record some of the words I was using every time I dropped a slide on the floor. That's not meant for family viewing. I looked at hundreds of them, and it reminded me of how much I like digital photography, Elron.
Well, I'll just remind everyone, if you have a question for Kevin, post that in the Q&A now. We have a few questions coming in, so we'll dive into those. But if anything else sparks, comes up, just put that in. We'll try to get through as many questions as we can. So to start off, we have a pretty standard one. So do you know anything about his cameras or any other technical aspects of his work?
I do not, and I obviously, not obviously, certainly he was using 2 1/4. I'm certain of all those black and whites in Milwaukee, because a lot of the prints were just plain square. But what he was using for the color, I don't know. I really don't. Some of you guys who are way more experienced with photography might be able to make a really good educated guess about, where someone would get good Kodachromes like that back in those days. I don't, but he certainly mastered the form.
Well, to jump off of that a little bit, we have someone asking, do you think Linn had a distinctive aesthetic to his photography, or as Charlie Hunter puts it, do we just get swept up in his work because of the times that he photographed?
Some wise guy just asked me, this wise person, did Linn provide painstakingly detailed information on the slide mounts? No, he did not.
So I think we covered
the question. Yeah, the question. Well, I think he did have what was the word you used, Haley?
A distinct aesthetic.
A distinct aesthetic. Yeah, I think the aesthetic, and this isn't a cop out. I think his aesthetic was, it's all interesting. Don't ever point the camera in one direction or the other. Feel free to turn around, look at this, look at that. A lot of the slides that I didn't get processed or didn't use are dwarf signals, or a baggage cart or that kind of thing. And he shot a lot of good action pictures, and then of course he shot a lot of track equipment that I did not include because I didn't think it was all that interesting, but lots of close-ups of all kinds of early versions of ballast cleaners and everything else that the mechanized track gangs might have used in the 1950s. But I think he was all about shooting he was a great exponent. Elron, we talk about this all the time in the center. He's a great exponent of shoot the entire railroad world, not just the train.
Right. And I would think we really benefit from the fact that with his tenure as model railroader editor, he was kind of calibrated to go and shoot everything, shoot the entire environment, because it helped with the modeling. So we really get the benefit of that.
I'm sure those great shots of his, and there's lots more where that came from, of West Junction on the Milwaukee Electric, ended up on somebody's layout somewhere, or ended up in a how-to book or something like that.
Right.
He was doing his homework.
Yeah, exactly. I noticed someone did ask about what are ways that people can see more of his collection. Is there a book that is devoted to his work, or at least is a showcase?
No. There is that early story that Morgan ran in Trains, and I believe it was March of '85, which, if you have back issues, or if you have access to the what I think is the wonderful Kalmbach Digital Archive, you can go back and look. And then if you look back through issues of classic Trains, I'm not so sure about Trains. I don't know how often Jim Rinn used his stuff, but Rob McGonigal made frequent use. But there's no way to look them up without paging through the pages, because I don't believe they're indexed by a photographer. Other than that, no, I'm hoping maybe somebody from Kalmbach Media is listening today, and maybe they're getting an idea of what could be done with some of this stuff, either by them or by, I'm just thinking out loud here, a contracted third party.
Wonder who we
Who could
need.
that be?
Do you know approximately how many slides he did shoot?
Yeah.
Oh boy. Well, if I have all of them, I'm guessing there are about 25 or 30 slide sheets times roughly 24. So 500 or 600 of them. It's not all that many compared to how many slides Ron Flannery probably has. But sorry, Ron. But I think there must be several hundred, but I don't think it reaches 1,000 unless I went back and, but it's certainly no more than that. They all fit in one big brown envelope.
That's pretty manageable.
Yeah, here's what I think happened. This is a guess, but I don't think Linn went out and railfanned like the rest of us, or many of the rest of us do. I think he took his camera along when he was traveling for the company. I think a lot, or else he was traveling with Harriet on vacation. The family could inform me more completely about that. But I think a lot of this stuff was he was going to train shows or meeting with advertisers in the model railroad field, and he took a camera along. And as any Kalmbach staffer knows, when you go on a business trip, you turn it into a pleasure trip as well.
Well, he obviously focused a lot on Milwaukee, having lived there. We have quite a few people asking if he has much stuff along the East Coast or in the Northeast, including one person who specifically asked about the Western Maryland.
A smattering, but not as much as I think back on what I saw, not as much as I thought. I kept waiting to encounter a GG1. There was one or two shots of a New Haven box cab of some kind. But I don't remember seeing much in the Northeast. He seemed to, based on what I saw, to do the Midwest, the Southeast, the Southwest, and the Far West, and the Great Plains. I'll have to go back and look. I don't think there was a lot in. I certainly didn't avoid the Northeast in picking these slides because I've got an affinity for that as well. But I don't think I saw much.
Let's see. So were the shots worked over with restoration of color, any other enhancements, or how much reworking did you do on these?
I did not do any because I confess I don't really know how to, except in the most crude sort of way. I will credit Aaron on the CRPA staff for fixing a terrible scratch on that photograph of the Grand Trunk 484. No, I didn't do anything. Certainly some things could be done to improve a number of those pictures. Although I think a lot of them are just dead on without any help at all. And, whatever kind of camera he had, don't you think, Elron, it was a pretty damn good camera?
Yeah. I'm curious to what he used too, but I mean, whatever it was solid equipment. Yeah, it definitely holds up. It holds up well. It's just minor adjustments you would make to the color and exposure and maybe a little contrast. That's really it.
Yeah,
he did a really fine job. Yeah.
Let's see. So we have, so apparently Linn was on a Milwaukee PBS TV show about trains in the 1970s. Any chance that that's in the Kalmbach archive?
Could be. It very well could be. Do we know who produced it? Was it Channel 10, the PBS station here in town?
Yes. Yeah, probably.
Yeah, it was. Well, we might. We had a relationship with PBS for decades. We sponsored that train show that they did at Channel 10 for years. We'd have to ask Tom Hoffman, or I could check in the library. The Kalmbach library includes a fair number of old films and tapes. Whether or not that one is in there, I don't know. Boy, that'd be a good one to find, though, and to put on the MR website. That would be a good question to give to Eric White, the current and new editor of Model Railroader, and see if that's something he wanted to check out for his audience.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I'd love to see that on YouTube at the very least. But it sounds like a lot of fun.
I would put out there, check YouTube. You never know what's out there.
Yeah. It might already be there.
Public television.
Linn was an engaging guy. He could talk about anything. Of course, we've talked about railroading here, but he could talk about ancient history, European history, geopolitics, huge industries, mining, steel making. He was so knowledgeable about all kinds of stuff, and he was always so eager to talk about it. And I respectfully made a comparison in my blog a few months ago of him to Mr. Peabody on Rocky and Bullwinkle, and that was not down out of disrespect, because Mr. Sherman was, or Mr. Peabody was somebody who knew just about everything. And I also looked up today and realized that Mr. Peabody graduated from Harvard at age 3. So when I speak of Mr. Peabody and Linn, I'm doing it respectfully.
See, here's someone just wrote in. It was on Channel 10. He was at the Elmhurst Model Railroad Club. He was teaching about switching a coal mine in the prototypical manner, but he was using a Santa Fe war bonnet F7. Okay, thank you, Keith, for sending that.
Well, the guys from MR might, if they haven't already, might want to dig that up.
Yeah. So someone asked about, you'll have to help me, remind me of which shot this was, in the shot of the newsstand.
Yeah.
For the context, is that in trains or any past trains or model railroad issues?
A different shot taken around the same time, and I found it too late to have it scanned. It was better exposed. Shows up in that 1985 article in Trains, and I believe it was March, The Color World of Linn Westcott. Morgan included a shot of crowds in that concourse in that story. And it really hurts to look at that picture, because any of us who've traveled to Chicago knows what frankly a rat hole the current concourse is, and to think that that's what used to be there, it's kind of painful.
So we just got a new one in. You mentioned that Linn was a cartographer. So could you see much or any correlation between any maps that he made and the photographs that he took? Or conversely, the maps can give clues to where some of the photos were taken.
Well, I don't know that answer, but I think that's a very good question that probably points to a very good likelihood. Because Linn was the kind of person, of course, he couldn't go everywhere in 1946 or 49. You just couldn't get around that way. But I'm sure that it happened more than once that he solved a map making problem by consulting a photograph, and probably one of his own photographs, because his maps in the 1940s and the early years of trains were incredible. They were loaded with detail. They didn't quite have the finesse of today's current map makers, like David Steife is such a master at this sort of thing. But Linn's maps were pretty darn good for the era, and they were all hand drawn and really good stuff.
Were there many models that were just around the Kalmbach offices back in the day that he made?
Sure. Which ones I don't know, because after a while it all becomes a blur. But downtown, and especially in the new building, when we moved out there in 1988 or 89, the company made a provision for models in various parts of the building. And of course, the MR staff, I think it's still there. The MR staff has always had a big glass case right in the middle of their offices, probably right outside of Eric's office now, the current editor. And some of those models were by Al Kalmbach, because they're very historic in that they were done by the founder back in the 1930s, or even younger, or even earlier in his childhood. But I'm sure there's some Linn Westcott stuff in there too. Although I think Linn Westcott's glory in the model railroad field is beyond just models of trains. It was the entire environment that he helped readers master by kind of figuring out ahead of time and then teaching them.
Right.
Yeah, so do you have any kind of enduring memories of your time with him, or any great lessons that he taught you professionally or personally?
Well, he helped along with several other people. When I was working there in 74, 5, and 6, I was writing ad copy. And so the discipline of a copywriter is to learn how to say way more than you can ever say in a story in much less space. So every word has to have a lot of power and a lot of content to it. And it took me a while to learn how to do that to whatever extent I got good at it. And Linn and Rosie Entringer and Morgan were especially helpful in that regard. Write tight. You know, I mean, I had come in as a one-year newspaper man, so I knew something about writing tight, but there's no writing tight like writing for advertisements. And Linn was very helpful in that regard, because sometimes I'd have to go down the hall to his big old office. It was a very dark office, almost like a grotto. And I'd go in there and, hey, Linn, what's this? You know, I have to write about it. What is it? And he was always good about that.
Well, I'm kind of curious. I had a question that's more to the audience, and I'm wondering maybe people can hit with their reaction buttons or something. How many of all of you are modelers that didn't know that Linn was a photographer of the 1-to-1 scale? Because we've definitely heard that in our social media comments.
I think I can create a poll. So this would be
the visual
in a CRPNA program. Did you know?
There we go. We need a poll. That's it.
That's very interesting to me, because, you know, Morgan made it a cover story in Trains, and you'd think that some of the knowledge of Westcott would transfer over, but the crossover between Trains and Model Railroader, I mean, I don't know what it is now, but back in my day, I think it was about a third of Trains readers read MR, and maybe vice versa.
Oh, okay.
Oh, thanks.
Oh, there's
All
our
right,
poll.
polls live. Looks like people are answering it very quickly.
Oh, I can't vote.
Oh, over 70% did not.
It won't let me vote.
It's just for the paying crowd, so to speak. Wow, that's amazing.
Well, what a great discovery that you've shared with us, Kevin, that we can learn so much more about someone's life and career, and, you know, adding to the great treasure trove of great road photographers.
Great. Well, it was a lot of fun to do. It was a fair amount of work. Next assignment I'm going to do, if I do one, the photographer is going to actually take notes.
Yes.
This is a good reminder to all of us.
Just prerequisite.
Yeah, either on the back of the print or on the slide mount or in the metadata.
Or in the metadata, yeah. Good lesson for all us photographers to pay attention to that.
Yeah, as familiar as Tehachapi is, for instance, and I've been out there several times over the last 40 years. Those two pictures at Tehachapi really had me flummoxed there for a while, because things look so different now. So yeah, no, it was a lot of fun. I'm glad I could do it, and I hope the audience enjoyed it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I can speak for everyone to say that they did. This was one of our highest registration rates for one of our programs, certainly the highest registration for in our 2023 series. So we're always thankful when Kevin lends his time and his expertise to our online programming series. And thanks to the audience for tuning in tonight, now Ron for helping out as usual.
Thanks, guys.
So yes, thank you again. We'll be posting this event in a few weeks' time. We are recording it. So everyone who's registered tonight will get a link for the recording in about 2 weeks' time. Our next online event will be a tutorial of our new collections management system, Odyssey. That registration is live on our website now. That's railphoto-art.org. Got that in the link right now.
Yeah, definitely.
And then we will also be having a second program in August, on August 22nd, featuring the winners of our awards program. So definitely check out both of those. August is going to be a really fun month. So I hope to see you guys all then, and have a good night.
Great.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. It was really fun.